Podcast time again. Hey, everybody. I'm Scott Costa, the publisher of TED Magazine. Thanks for joining me for another video and audio distributed with TED Magazine podcast. Had my regular guests on because they're so great at it. Andrea, Olson, and Desiree Grace. We're talking strategy. We're talking about, of course, there was so much strategy that went into last year. And now this year, it's like, how are we sharpening it? How are we changing it? What are we doing? They had some great comments. Really, it was great to talk to them. I want to introduce them to you real quick first. Andrea Olson is a trained behavioral scientist and customer centricity expert. She's the CEO of Pragmatic, helping companies better understand their customers through behavioral economics. She also speaks from the stage, teaching others the art and science of customer understanding. Desiree Grace is currently the Vice President, Strategic Distribution of the Americas for Panduit. She develops, leads, and drives channel partner strategy, channel partner marketing and programs, and deploys and develops the channel sales team. And she manages the financial indicators within North America. Both great guests, great conversation about strategy and things you need to know moving forward in 2021. Check it out. Here's my podcast with Andrea Olson and Desiree Grace. All right, again, a couple of my favorite guests, Desiree Grace, Andrea Olson, are joining us on the Distributed with TED Magazine podcast. Yeah, give them a wave. It's all good. So we're going to talk about, this is a good one, because we're going to talk about strategy and be strategic. And we were strategy hyper-centric a year ago, today. And I keep referring to this. Let's remember where we were a year ago, where we were filling out PPP forms and we were hoarding toilet paper. And now we're different. And so we probably have to talk about, how we want to be strategic moving forward. So Desiree, I'm going to start with you. Kind of tell me, not the obvious in terms of, yes, we're focusing on strategic in different ways, but what are you really sort of getting into when it comes to, the importance of strategy now is more important than a year ago because what?
So much has changed. Mm-hmm. When you think about strategy, it's proactive. Mm-hmm. It's a really short list of impactful things you want to accomplish, usually over the next year, but it could be over the next 2 to 3 years also. And part of deciding what those 2 or 3 impactful things that you want to work on is looking at what's going on in the world around you. We have had some massive changes in what I call the macro environment. So politically, we've seen a lot of changes. Panduit was recently involved in a panel on diversity and inclusion.
Right.
And that kind of came out of some things going on in the socio-political, cultural environment. Gosh, we all know what's going on economically. We all know what's going on health-wise. We've seen a lot of changes in the way people use technology in their daily lives and in how we're engaging with each other. This meeting right here, classic example, right?
Yeah.
Another Zoom or Teams or Skype meeting.
Yeah.
So take a zoom out, pun intended. But take a look at what are the macro environmental trends that are really relevant to your business. And sometimes you got to separate the trends from the fads, but you want to not consistently be reacting, because if you're reacting, you're being left behind. So, making time to pull back, look at the macro environment, your industry, your customers, society at large, ancillary industries, other things that maybe aren't relevant, but maybe you should be paying attention to, where you could potentially get some ideas. We look at what's going on in healthcare and teledoc. Maybe that's something that's relevant to your business if you're trying to do remote diagnostics on a paint line and a PLC, hypothetically. What are those trends that you need to do something differently about or in response to or to get ahead of? And I think when you're talking about something that's impactful, it's not the same-o.
Yeah, right. It's a great point. And Desiree, and I'll ask Andrea because Desiree made the point here. There's so much impacting us, right? Again, like you said, there's again political, there's socioeconomic things, there's the economy in general. Again, Desiree goes through all those things. So Andrea, how do you kind of, how are you able to focus on each individual thing, yet it comes into being an overall strategy without leaving something behind, or, oh gosh, we didn't think of that, or we put too much emphasis on one thing instead of another. It's just so, you want to be strategic, but you obviously don't want to make any mistakes either.
Right. But it is more of an art than a science, right?
Mm-hmm.
We can't do it all. And because of the changes in our environment over the last year, there's been so much shifting that coming out of this, we feel like, okay, we have to tackle all these things and figure out what we need to do in every single area. And it's honestly unreasonable for an individual or an organization, when you have a lot of moving parts, to try to move all those parts simultaneously. And I think the big thing about strategy that has gone by the wayside, even prior to the pandemic, was this sense of urgency that has taken over things. To be there's first to market, and then there's that motivation to get stuff done. A long time ago, back in the 80s, when strategy was a big thing, and you went to some consultant and they told you, oh, you need a strategy. And they put together these binders of crap that then you paid a lot of money for and never used. And so the reaction to that was, okay, forget the strategy. Let's just do. Let's do and test. So let's do something. Did it work? Did it not work? Okay, let's do something else. And because it's such a polar reaction, we lose any thinking, critical thinking that's required to say, but we have finite resources. Those resources cost money. We need to think strategically about where to put them. And to tie things together, to me, from a strategic perspective, the big thing that everyone needs to focus on coming out of this is differentiation. It's not about doing stuff. It's not about putting out every fire. It's coming out of this, how are we going to be different in a way that's relevant, impactful, and important to our customers as well as our employees, right? Because recruitment's going to be a big factor as well. So I think that's the big elephant in the room that people are overlooking.
So to follow up then, Andrea, what's sort of that, again, you talk about sort of that reaction and that sort of that reaction time, because, the world's impatient. Unfortunately, we live in a world with, you can order something from Amazon and it shows up in a few hours.
Right.
So what's that what's that timing to you in terms of, okay, we need to create the strategy, we need to execute strategy, and oh my gosh, it's time to create more strategy and execute more strategy. I mean, how does that play out?
Well, I mean, just like anything else, there are windows of time where, let's say, there's something like the PPP program where it's like, we need to take advantage of this now in a certain time period. Most organizations can be fully aware of what those things are. In the bigger scheme of things, I think everyone understands that taking 10 years to do something isn't plausible. But to do something in 2 weeks, depending on the size of it, depending on the scope of it, could also be ridiculous. And so what we've been seeing and hearing is people going back to this reactionary mode. We've had clients most recently that were saying, hey, we're coming out of this. We know we need to connect with customers more deeply. We want to do a brand refresh. We want to update our logo. And it's like, well, that's somewhat irrelevant to what you want to achieve as a differentiator for the organization. Everything comes out of who you are and what makes you different. One of the great examples that we've been talking about here was, honestly, Trader Joe's, right? You look at Trader Joe's as a grocery store, right? And you say, okay, well, it's low prices and it's a fun experience and yada, yada, yada. Their differentiator is they want to be and strive to be as close to their customers as possible. Mm-hmm. And then that drives every single other decision in the organization, right? How employees behave, what's the organizational culture, where we put our money. And so having that thesis going into 2021, 2022 will then really align everything you do. And now each of those individual tactics might have more speed and be able to turn around quicker. When, let's say, if you're making a big cultural shift, that's going to take time and go on for a long period.
So Desiree, I jotted down some notes. I'm going to try and tie some things together. And I hate to refer to people as resources, by the way. They're people, but I will call them
human capital.
Yeah, exactly. It's just I just feel it's so insulting, and I hate to do that. But tying things together, you were talking, a little bit about diversity and inclusion, and then Andrea brought up the point of, it's art, not science. 2 + 2 isn't always going to equal 4 when you're creating some of your strategies. So how do those, again, I'm going to use the word, how do you use your resources across a wide swath, whether you're, again, men, women, people of color, whatever it might happen to be, to join them all in together to make sure that you're getting the most return on what your investment needs to be in your strategy? What's the strategy session makeup look like?
First of all, I think you have to talk about the desired future state. And if the desired future state is better customer intimacy, you need to share that with the team. If the desired future state is we don't want to just sell parts and pieces, we want to sell solutions and services, you need to share that. And then everybody in the organization needs to understand that that's a priority, and that their contributions and their ideas around customer engagement or solutions and services, all those ideas are welcome, and that's going to be a priority for resources. I saw something interesting in a news feed this morning where a large global distributor bought into software to help contractors bid jobs. And the same global distributor also bought an interest in electric vehicle charging stations and the monitoring and services associated with that.
Right.
What that tells me is that this distributor is trying to up their game from the tactical order fulfillment parts and pieces to a big value add where they're more relevant and more important to their customers. And where they're also starting to think about not just the core traditional electrical contractor stuff, but other opportunities, say in infrastructure. So those two things by the same global distributor are pretty compelling if you look at that, where they're choosing to spend their money and where they're investing resources. So I now know, if I didn't already, a little bit about what direction they're trying to take their organization. So the inverse of that, if you will, is what didn't they spend money on? So, maybe they didn't spend money bringing in a fourth supplier of cable ties, because that's just not a good move with an ROI.
Right.
Hypothetically.
Hypothetically, they have a bunch already. Exactly. I see what you're saying. Not that we're insulting the cable tie people. I understand. I get it.
Oh, absolutely not. But what it begs is, it's not just what you're saying yes to, it's what you're saying no to. Because Andrea brought this up earlier, and she's dead on. You got a finite amount of time and you got a finite amount of resources. Whether those resources are manufacturing capacity, whether those resources are the number of people on your team. It could be real estate, you could be landlocked, whatever your resources are. Everybody's got a limitation in resources. So you're moving resources and you're redeploying them to a place where you're going to get a greater ROI long term. And that's the other piece of strategy that Andrea brought up earlier that I concur with. This isn't a short-term 90-day turnaround. When you're talking strategy, you really are investing for the long haul.
It's a good point. And so, Andrea, let me follow up with you too. And again, I'm not going to let you off on the easy answer is money. how do you know when your strategy is working for you over, again, these periods of time that Desiree pointed out might be 90 days or 6 months or beyond. And again, you can't let the answer be because we're making money. How do you know that these things are actually working for you and your strategies are going in the direction you want them to go in?
I love your money comment because, we've had too many clients that when we talk about strategy, they say, well, we can do all these things. However, one of the things we need to consider is that the shareholders want to see certain things and we need to make a profit.
Yeah.
Now, the problem, and Desiree was just on point with this, is that it's a long-term view. And I think with the instability we've had and just this kind of roller coaster we've been on, who is that confident to say, all right, I'm going to pick a point in the future and that's where we're going to drive to. And, God forbid anything derails us. But it's not so much these individual ROI elements of is X, Y, or Z improving every quarter? It's, are we achieving these bigger goals? So like, as Desiree said, and I had alluded to, customer intimacy. It's like, do we have more comprehensive, valuable knowledge about our customers than we did 12 months ago? Mm-hmm. That is not something that I'm taking to the bank and cashing a check on.
Right.
However, that is an investment of information that now gives you further insight to adjust that strategy as you go. So it's a learning process where you say, we know this is our objective and we can design everything around it. And yes, there's going to be adjustments along the way. But if you say, well, we just need to grow 10% this year, and that's oftentimes what you see in all these lovely strategic plans, that someone picked a prime number out because it sounds good and feels comfortable, but there was no basis of not only where that was coming from, but also how are you going to do this in a way where this could be a consistent growth? Or if that 10%, what if that number could have been 40%? That's what people want to know. But it goes back to that instant gratification that we have been fed with Google and Facebook and just access to information where we believe subconsciously that all the answers are there. We just need to find it. We need to apply it, and then poof, the money will come.
Yeah. So Andrea, then what's the, again, don't put a time frame. It's impossible to put a time frame on it. I'm not going to make you do that. That's, again, I seem to ask you all the crazy, ridiculous. I box you into a corner. Don't answer it this way. Answer it that way. I apologize for that.
That's good.
But it's like, what's your time frame? Again, there is, again, using what Desiree said earlier about electric vehicles, and again, a major worldwide distributor is investing. And I think that's great. The fact is, the percentage of electric vehicles on the road right now is not incredibly high. It will be one day. I firmly believe that. Mm-hmm. But it's not right now. So you're not seeing a 90-day major return on your investment. What's your time frame to sort of maintain your patience and know that you're getting closer? Again, there's more centricity with your customers, but you're not really seeing a dollar figure return on your investment.
All right, let me shift this around.
Okay.
Fair, right? What's good for the goose.
Fair enough. I boxed you in. You're allowed to shift it around.
All right. Let's say your strategic objective, your personal strategic objective is to get healthy. You want to be healthy and stay healthy. Okay. So there's a lot of tactics you can use to do that. And how do you measure that you're getting more healthy? There's things along the way, but have you achieved this pinnacle of health where you're like, great, I'm done. I can go back to beer and potato chips, achieved, it's over. Now it's a fundamental shift of this is how we're going to behave, and this is what we're going to be, in a sense, in perpetuity. You can measure progress and you can say, hey, I lost 2 pounds this week. That's progress, right? But Can you say on December 31st, I'm going to be healthy? No, you can't, because there's so many factors that go into being healthy. Losing weight is only an aspect of becoming healthy. There's mental health, physical health, social health, and so when we talk about strategy, it's that higher level. And you think about this analogy, mental, physical, social, those are initiatives, departments, investments. Those are all the bits and pieces of your organization that tie back to we're going to be healthy.
Right. Desiree, follow up.
The other piece of that is it needs to be sustainable. It's not the crash diet to go to your class reunion and then back to green beer and potato chips.
Why not?
Because it's St. Patrick's Day while we're recording this.
Yeah, right, exactly.
Green beer. But if it's strategic, it's not losing weight for the class reunion, but it's I want to permanently get healthy. That's sustainable. Right. That needs to be systemic, long-lasting change. And systemic, long-lasting change is a lot harder because in the conference room, people roll their eyes and say, okay, it's the initiative du jour. Then this binder is going to collect dust 6 months from now.
Yeah.
Or, wow, I'm going to evolve. I'm going to up my game. I'm going to make a permanent change in the way we are doing things. So that change needs to be consistent. It needs to be sustainable and it needs to stick. And even if you have another strategic objective in, let's say, 3 or 5 years, you're not going to go back to what you're doing today or last year. You're going to continue to evolve and grow and improve. And those changes are going to be sustainable. And in a lot of cases, they're going to be building blocks.
Right.
So,
like to your point, right? It's like you said, talk about getting healthy. Your next phase of your strategy might be, all right, you know what we're going to do is we're now going to try to help get others healthy.
Yeah, there you go.
It expands, but you have to have that premise to begin with. You have to have that premise that then drives those principles.
But Desiree, let me throw this one out at you. I mean, I think it's a great analogy. I appreciate the health. Andrea, I appreciate you bringing up the health thing because I think it really has kind of sparked a lot of thought, and it's a great analogy to the strategy. But I mean, I'm not a big believer in fact, I'll go so far as to say I really hate it when everybody gets in a conference room and you have a brainstorm session. And I think that the best, one of the things that work from home is really kind of stomping on a little bit is those casual conversations in a common area in the office where all of a sudden it leads to, we should expand our strategy to say, wait a minute, we might be onto something. And then a couple more people join into the conversation and something's going on. First of all, I feel like that gets lost a little bit because everybody's working in different places these days. But secondly, how often then should you, Desiree, I'm asking you, how often should you try and, get people together to continue working on strategy without it being every day is another strategy session? Like, I know we have to do some work on these strategies, but yeah. So what's the flow?
Well, talk to me in about 9 months, but I'm trying something with my team.
Yeah.
I am trying 3 breakout sessions this year where we're taking 3 hours out and we're going to meet, and I've got just a real loose agenda and just a couple slides.
Yeah.
But here's my observation. I have noticed that we've been so busy with the tactical and the reactive. And one of the things that Zoom and technology has led us to is back-to-back meetings. Yeah. So, we've been a hamster on a wheel a lot the last year. So my thought was, we're not having those casual conversations. We're not having a half hour between meetings or something over a cup of coffee or a break room or lunch. So what we're doing instead is we're going to block out time and we're literally going to do some brainstorming. And I've got like some nuggets that I'm going to try to use to get the conversation going. So I don't know how this is going to work. This could be a complete and utter boondoggle. And if it is, I'll say, okay, I tried, but it was an absolute miserable failure. But if it works, and I'm only planning to do this 3 times this year for 3 hours each. Yeah. My teams, if they are listening to this or do listen to it in the future, they may be rolling their eyes. Time will tell. But if it works to force us to take time off the hamster wheel and talk about what do we think the next 1, 2, 3 years looks like? What are the 1 or 2 really critical things we want to try and accomplish, and what needs to happen on an incremental basis to make those things happen? Then I'll let you know if this was a good idea or a horrible idea.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know yet, but I'm trying to think differently about how we make time to work on the business instead of being in the business,
right?
Which the last 12 months has been pretty challenging.
Right. And so
that's a long-winded answer, more than you want.
No, but it flows perfectly into what will be my last question. And it's not an easy one. I'm going to throw it out at you and kind of go from there. What do you guys, I'll start with you, Andrea. What do you think is more important? The strategy when times aren't so good, like a year ago, or the strategy today when, at least on the horizon, you see some positivity ahead? I didn't say it was an easy question. I just said, what do you think's more?
Okay, so you know what? I'm going to do another analogy because.
Okay, here we go.
You can internalize. You can kind of go, I see where you're going without using consultancy words.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, you think about our own personal lives and job instability. And you say, okay, well, there's cases where, let's say I lost my job and I have to immediately go find a job or find a way to make money today. And that's my short-term tactics that I'm looking at.
Right.
But then on the other side of the coin, you need to consider, well, is this also an opportunity? What can I do to make sure that these short-term tactics don't become the permanent?
Mm-hmm.
And so maybe the arc is, okay, I'm going to take some online courses. I'm going to go back to school. I'm going to get certified in this. I'm going to add a skill to my deck. And then in the times that are good, right, when we say, okay, things are rolling along, I don't have to do anything, it's still a question of what are you doing next? What's the next level for you in 5 years, 10 years?
Yeah.
And some individuals might say, this is fine, I'm fine, I'm going to retire here. And everyone knows companies and company cultures that are like that.
And people.
Yeah. Right.
But there's others, organizations and individuals who say, I need to consider that because there's going to be behavior changes. When you're 30, your outlook is different. When you're 40, your outlook is different. When you're 50, your outlook, or when you're a small agile company, your outlook is different versus I'm a mid-size and I kind of got a lot more moving parts, or I'm a big national corporation and making changes are like moving mountains. And so I'd say there isn't one time that's better. It's just we forget to do it. We don't think about it because it's one of those long-term things that we don't see that instant gratification from.
That's a good point. Desiree, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think I like the analogy because you do have the need in front of you, the hamster wheel stuff, the, oh my God, I got to get a job, my house payment, my blah, blah, blah. Mm-hmm. But then there's the taking the step back and saying, okay, maybe I need to get my MBA, or maybe I want to change careers, or maybe I need an executive coach, mm-hmm. or maybe, my continuing ed needs to be dusted off and refreshed, any number of variables. The same thing really does apply to companies. Mm-hmm. And, mm-hmm. I worked for an organization that had sold the same product for, 80 years. And one of the things I heard a lot in that organization, not my current employer, was this is the way we've always done it.
Yeah.
And
I love that phrase.
Oh yeah. And the implication was that means it's right. It must be right.
Yeah.
And
right.
My thought process was, if you've been doing the same thing for 80 years, whoa, I have a lot of change management that I'm going to be responsible for.
Right. And it was probably created by a guy who got fired 79 years ago. And you're like, oh, great. So we're still using his strategies. Congratulations to us.
That is a really extreme example.
No, but it happens everywhere. It could happen to a guy 10 years ago. It happens in a lot of places. Yeah.
So the point is, you are literally in 2021 doing things the same way you did it in, I don't know, 1960.
Yeah.
Is that really smart? Did you hear what you just said?
Right.
So making that time to think about, whoa, the world's changed, the world's different. Should we be doing things differently? Golly, people are doing all kinds of things on their tablet now, and maybe having to pick up the phone or fax orders in might not be our best way to transact in 2021. I'm just saying.
No, I agree. It's again, sort of I'll tell a quick real life story from my past employer that didn't happen here, and then we'll wrap this up. But I had a strategy meeting, and a guy came in, and this was like in 2010, give or take. So the internet had been invented, and there was technology. And he came in and proposed a strategy that we had done in like 1991. And my boss was like, "Hey, can I have a second right now?" And told everybody to leave the room and shut the door. It's just me and him. And honest to God, looked at me and said, "How fast can we fire that guy?" I was like, "Really?" And I'm like, "Oh my God, like, I don't know, but I don't think we can do it today." But it, there is sort of and it's interesting too, because when times get tough, like they did last year, people want to fall back on what worked whenever it was a number of years ago without really thinking their way through it. Don't you think, Desiree?
As we look to wrap this up, I think one actionable thought I would end this with is change management.
Yeah.
If you're going to execute your strategy successfully, part of the most important tactics around that, if you want that sustainable change we talked about earlier, you have to have a robust plan around change management. And, maybe that's a topic for another podcast. Yeah. But you've got that guy that wants to do things like 1991. You got to figure out how to bring him along with you.
Yeah, that's a great point. Listen, thanks both of you. I appreciate the insight. Again, I always learn stuff from you guys. It's so great. And again, that health analogy was excellent. So thank you, Desiree, Grace. Thanks, Andrea, Olson. I appreciate you guys coming on. Real quick, again, if you want to contact me about this podcast, other podcasts, TED Magazine things, 2 ways. Again, I'm still answering my own phone. It's right there. 314-812-5311, or send me an email, scosta, SCOSTA @NAAD.org. Love to hear from you about all this stuff till we get a chance to talk again. Thanks, everybody, for watching and for listening. The Distributed with TED Magazine podcast.
Thanks, Scott.